So I see that the people are joining, and we will start in 1 minute. Okay. So Dana, can we start? So good afternoon, good evening, good morning for most of you who are in Latin America. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today in the context of the Latin American Caribbean Climate Week. It is our pleasure to have such distinguished panelists for this discussion today. The event will be in English because we are hoping to have an audience that's broader than non-Spanish speakers. So apologies for that, but I hope it's not a problem for you. My name is Fernanda Carvalho. I am the Global Policy Manager for Climate and Energy at WWF International, and I'm going to be moderating this event today. Our objective is to have an open dialogue with very special climate leaders and a government representative from Colombia that will give us a taste of how things happen in the ground. We want to exchange ideas, lessons on NDC enhancement, ambition, and of course, the key role of non-state actors. And I will also briefly introduce a report that we are launching today on Latin American Caribbean NDCs, recommendations for decision makers. So I'm honored to introduce our distinguished panelists. The first one is Gonzalo Munoz. He's our high-level climate champion from the COP25. We have Pablo Vieira, the Global Director of the NDC Partnership Support Unit. We have our Manuel Pulgar Vidal. He's the practice leader of climate and energy at WWF International. He's a former COP president and also a Race to Zero, Race to Resilience ambassador. And we have our colleague, John Henry Melo Pineda. He's the technical coordinator of Colombia's NDC implementation at the Colombian Ministry of Environment. So I will start with Gonzalo since he will unfortunately have to leave us earlier. So I'll pose some questions to him and hopefully we can take also a question from the audience. So please use the question and answer feature and we'll try to answer most of your questions if time allows. So without further delay and thanking each panelist for being with us today, Gonzalo, so the first question I have for you is, how can the non-state actor agenda that you are playing such an interesting role in leading with Nigel Topping and also the Race to Zero contribute to the momentum on climate ambition and also on the NDC enhancement in LAC ahead of COP26?
Well, first, thank you so much, Fernanda, and great to see Manuel, Pablo, John Henry. It's really a pleasure to be with you. And let me be very clear, and this definitely connects to the work that that Manuel developed when he was the COP20 president and designing the Lima Paris Action Agenda. At the end, what we do as champions, what we do at the Global Climate Action Agenda must be as an ultimate goal to activate the ambition loop. It should be all the time reflected in the NDC enhancement. That's the ultimate goal. That's our vision. That's what we work for, right? And there are many ways in which the non-state actor can and should always contribute to create momentum in climate and to, as I said, develop the right type of action and provoke the increase of the ambition when it comes to the parties. But let me focus on mostly three of them that I will express later. First, of course, is taking immediate action on climate. The second one is definitely setting up ambitious medium and long-term targets. And the balance between the midterm and the long term is very important. We do not have to diminish the importance of both. And the third one is aligning the let's say, lobby and advocacy strategies with their climate commitment. So when it comes to taking immediate action, not everyone knows that the phrase non-state actors That is definitely not a nice one, and nobody wants to be referred to himself or herself by what you're not, right? But that refers to cities, regions in our continent. Countries like Brazil, Argentina, or Mexico have a very strong importance in terms of what the subnational states um, like I mean, the importance that they have in terms of internally in the country, right? So we have cities, regions, businesses, investors, then schools, universities, and all those actors that are definitely capable to reduce their emissions or enhance resilience through their concrete and direct action. And those are also refers somehow the organizations, the participants of the global economy that are capable of implementing an agreement like the Paris Agreement that we all are focusing on. In most of the cases, in these actors, they rely on our capabilities to address climate change. So the first thing they can do to create momentum is to show that they're taking action now. The importance of committing on even though sometimes are baby steps, on doing things immediately now, understanding the sense of urgency and reflecting that. Then, of course, the second one, setting ambitious medium and long-term targets. We know that the threats of climate impacts are already happening. They will last for decades and they will increase substantially unless we have our emissions in this decade and reach net zero, but by 2050 at the very latest. We are also pushing a lot, even changing the narrative, saying we have to reach net zero in the 40s at the very latest. So it's critical that non-state actors take action now and set those robust and credible and ambitious targets following science. By doing that, they definitely send the clear type of signal to the markets and national governments, allowing them to be more ambitious on their actions. All this is what we are promoting under Race to Zero and celebrating Manuel as one of our global ambassadors. And we already have about 4,000 members joining the initiative from the different partners. Only in the finance sector, between the Asset Owners Alliance, the Asset Managers Initiative, and the recent Net Zero Banking Alliance, we have over $72 trillion already committed to be net zero before 2050. So that's one of the major signals. And finally, of course, we expect that all non-state actors align their lobby and advocacy strategies with their climate commitments. Definitely, we are in a time when companies and investors and cities are transforming the way to operate. Now addressing climate definitely in the center of their strategy, and that they are now ready to publicly engage with other actors advocating for climate. This is what the Alliance for Climate Action are promoting under the fantastic leadership of the WWF. We need to create the national partnership among non-state actors that can publicly push and commit with their national governments to enhance their NDCs and set those net zero long-term strategies. And this is something that I've mentioned. This is my part of my secret plan, not so secret plan at this time, right? We have experienced in the US a fantastic role coming from a strong partnership of non-state actors committing to the fulfillment of the goal of the NDCs of the country through their own actions. And now we need to step up this type of alliances, the ACAs, in all other countries. We're seeing strong progress in Mexico, in Argentina. We just launched Brazil, and hopefully we will also have ACAs in Chile and maybe Peru in the near future, and then set also a way to interact between those ACAs in Latin America for bringing that narrative into the global community on climate, to reflect how much is happening in the global south. Can we interact not only national-wise between the non-state actors, but also as a continent, and then also bring the knowledge and experience from the global north to the global south. I understand that, as I said, the global climate action agenda is part of the legacies of COP20 in Lima. I do expect that part of what we're doing now on promoting the ACAs is part of the projection of that legacy. Hopefully Manuel will be proud of that.
Okay, so yeah, that was great, and congratulations for your work. We all acknowledge the leadership of those actors that you mentioned and the movement there. But now, on the other side, on the side of governments, what do we need from governments in the Latin America region, and not only in the Latin America region, to further engage those actors that you're working with? Can you provide us with some insights, please?
Well, I think that we have different phases, and of course, the basic and the general framework is about the Paris Agreement, and then we're seeing how much of that is being reflected and should be reflected more and more with NDC being enhanced in line with science. We're seeing, of course, a fantastic increase in terms of countries and parties committing to a net zero and resilient world by 2050 at the very latest. Now we need national governments to move from the design phase of their commitments, of course, reflected in the NDC and sectoral plans, into the implementation phase. We need to create a system that allows them to collect existing actions of non-state actors and integrate in their sectorial plans. There is a lot happening already that national governments are not necessarily aware of, or not necessarily considering properly on their plans. So that connection needs to be very actively created and enforced. The national governments also need to create the right incentives through policy and regulation that will allow and definitely must allow and invite and force non-state actors to align their strategies with the national climate goals. We're seeing some of that happening in some of the regions. We need to also learn from country to country. And finally, of course, it's expected from the government that they will engage with the finance sector to create the financial mechanisms that will allow this transformation to accelerate. Here in Chile, we have had great experience with the green bonds, not only coming from the national government, we're seeing that also in the private sector. But let me close by saying that we are entering a new area of multilateralism, an area, and this is something, of course, that we have heard from the Secretary General many times. This is an area where national governments should work with non-state actors to implement their actions. This relationship between parties and non-party stakeholders that under the UNFCCC started in COP20 in the Lima COP with the leadership of Manuel as COP president is now the only way in which we can still have chances to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement and remain global temperature at 1.5. And in that sense, Nigel and I are absolutely committed to develop whatever we can do to set the conditions for non-state actors all around the world to strengthen that collaboration and to show that, as I said, there's so much happening, but there's a lot more that can happen if we all align in the same way.
Thank you very much, Gonzalo. That was great. That was a great way to start our event here. And now I just want to present to you the report by WWF that we are launching today to frame the conversation that we're going to have from now on with a focus on NDCs. Let me just share my screen here. So, okay. So, yes, I should open here and, okay. So we're launching this report today. It's Latin American Caribbean NDCs, recommendations for decision makers. And we are looking at lessons from the LAC region for ambition, fostering systemic change, inclusiveness and participation, contribution to sustainable development and tracking process. Those of you who are familiar with our checklists for the NDCs we want, we recognize the 5 criteria that we have here, and we are also adding the opportunity for green recovery for this region because that's a key issue. And there is a case study on inclusiveness and participation in Colombia. And we'll have John talking to us about that, because this is a criterion on which Colombia did quite well, supported by WWF. So I hope you will look at the report and engage with it. And we'll have the edition in Spanish coming up next week. So this is the checklist that we are working with. It's at this website. We're not analyzing, of course, only LAC NDCs. We are analyzing all NDCs against this checklist to look beyond mitigation and how NDCs are advancing in other criteria as well, because it's not about setting targets, but creating the foundation for those targets to be implemented through policies. As Gonzalo mentioned, this move from design to implementation is really key. And this is where LAC stands on NDCs. So we are rating NDCs from the NDCs we want to NDCs we don't want. And we have 5 NDCs we want in LAC. So the region is doing quite well. We have Dominican Republic, Colombia, Panama, Costa Rica, and Suriname with NDCs we want. We have 4 that have a short way to go, are also very good. Argentina, Chile, Ecuador, and Jamaica. We have Cuba, Peru, Grenada, and Nicaragua that will need some further work on NDCs. And we have Mexico and Brazil not doing so well. But it's great that we have NDCs we want in the region. It's interesting also to point out that an NDC we want, it's not a perfect NDC, but has advanced from the previous NDC. And that's what the Paris Agreement mandates. And then this is a map that we have in the report that shows the situation in LAC. And then the map could give you an impression that things are not going so well, because we have the smaller countries in green here and yellow, and 2 big red countries here, Mexico and Brazil. But that could be a distortion, but it's also a very strong message that 2 big countries, 2 big economies in the region that should be leading the way are not. So there's still time to change course for those countries and present new and enhanced NDCs. Of the 33 countries in Latin America, 17 still are to submit their NDCs. So this report provides lessons for countries who haven't submitted NDCs yet on what the experience of other countries has been, and could also be important to illuminate this implementation phase that we are moving to. So look at our report. Feel free to send questions. I am one of the contact points for this report. So over now to the discussion with our other participants. I will move then to Pablo Vieira. Pablo is the Global Director of the NDC Partnership Support Unit. So Pablo, we're talking about green recovery as one of the key points in our report. How can LAC countries ensure climate compatible recovery packages based on your experience at the NDC Partnership Support Unit?
Well, thank you, Fernanda. Hola, Gonzalo, Manuel, John Henry. It's a true pleasure to be here. As always, I really love when WWF calls on me for these events, because they're always great conversations. I actually miss doing it in person like we did in Madrid a couple of years ago. So great to see you all. So I think you bring a very interesting topic to the table, which also complements very well with both the report and Gonzalo's points. We feel that there are 2 critical elements for countries to promote climate compatible recovery efforts. The first one is a strong updated NDC. Now, countries, of course, under the Paris Agreement are already submitting more robust, realistic, and ambitious NDCs. Not great in every case, but in some cases, as you just presented, they are doing it. And that should be seen as somehow as a blueprint for the development agenda of the country over the next decades. And of course, that needs to be very well connected to the COVID recovery package, which will focus on the economic recovery strategies to respond to the negative impacts of the pandemic. But to be able to guarantee that the recovery efforts are driving a shift towards a more sustainable development agenda, it is fundamental that countries use their climate commitments to strengthen the ability to build back better after the pandemic. So let me talk a little bit about those 2 elements. First, in terms of NDC enhancement, the NDC Partnership launched its Climate Action Enhancement Package in 2019. and is currently supporting already still 67 countries in the process of enhancing their NDCs and raising ambition. 20 of those are from Latin America and the Caribbean. And this is done in a process where requests coming from countries outline and drive the process. And we're having currently 46 members supporting financially and technically the efforts by countries, including, of course, WWF, that is a key implementing partner in 4 of these countries. So far, out of those 67 countries, 24 have submitted NDCs, 11 of them in Latin America and the Caribbean. We did a short analysis on 19 of them. I guess it's compatible to the work that you did. And we looked at 3 main elements. First, ambition, both in mitigation and adaptation. Second, the quality of the NDC. And third, the process through which countries approach the revision. And these 3 elements are very important because countries suffered in terms of ambition, quality, and process in the first round of NDCs. So under CAP, we wanted to make sure that there were resources available for countries to be able to do a comprehensive effort in putting together the new NDCs. And the early results are promising. In terms of ambition, almost all countries have increased mitigation targets. Nearly all of the countries in LAC countries have adopted an economy-wide mitigation set of targets, the ones that we supported. Others are setting sector-specific goals according to national priorities and needs. I'll give you an example. Panama plans to restore 50,000 hectares of their national forests, which will contribute to absorb approximately 2.6 million tons of CO2 equivalent by 2050. This is a critical element of their NDC. All countries supported by the partnership raised ambition on adaptation. And I think we can't forget about this important element, especially in Latin America. Costa Rica, for example, has specified targets and measures to maximize the use and impact of nature-based solutions, both in mitigation and on adaptation. But it's very important to look at the other 2 elements, because we believe that quality and process are the vehicles to unlock ambition. Having a strong process in place and good information will allow countries to raise ambition. So countries are also enhancing the quality by having strengthening data, modeling, and projections in the work that they're doing, by developing implementation plans so that they can have realistic NDCs that can be actually implemented, by costing them, by aligning NDCs with other development frameworks like the long-term strategies, like the SDGs, like their national development plans. Colombia, for example, and I don't mean to take any of the talking points from our colleague, is updating its NDC with an integrated vision of resilience and progressive emission reductions towards carbon neutrality in 2050 with specific sector prioritization. So they're looking at the whole picture as part of their NDC. Finally, countries are also strengthening the NDC revision process, greater transparency, inclusion of more stakeholders, including minorities, women, youth, and private sector, going to Gonzalo's points, bringing in the subnational level, the non-state actors into the discussion. Dominican Republic, for example, is mapping contributions from the private sector to understand the potential against mitigation and adaptation targets. This is very much connected then to the second point, which is the economic recovery. And we launched last year the Economic Advisory Initiative based on requests coming from countries saying, we really want to make sure that our recovery is a green recovery. We just don't have the capacity and the specific knowledge to do this. So last year, we launched this initiative, and we're now deploying almost 60 economic advisors to ministries of finance and planning, again, bringing those relevant stakeholders to the table to drive climate action in 34 countries. And this is supported by 13 partners. In Latin America, we have 18 economic advisors being deployed in 11 countries with support from 5 partners. And they're working in different areas. They are first developing new economic recovery strategies. For example, in Colombia, the advisor contributed to the National Policy on Sustainable Recovery that was released in 2021. They're mainstreaming recovery with national development plans. In Jamaica, the government has harmonizing its green recovery measures with its existing national development plan by revising relevant sections. They're aligning recovery measures with their NDCs by preparing project pipelines and mobilizing climate finance. In St. Lucia, the advisor is identifying and preparing shovel-ready bankable projects to boost economic growth and to reduce emissions based on the priorities included in the NDC. And finally, they're developing fiscal policies and instruments. So in Grenada, the advisor is identifying and designing instruments such as guarantees, venture capital, and green bonds that can stimulate green recovery based on the priorities also identified in the NDCs. So we see how these two exercises feed from each other, and that's what needs to happen. And we're seeing great examples in Latin America that are being built on more ambitious NDCs from the countries that you have mostly in green and light yellow in your report. Thank you, Fernanda.
Thanks, Pablo. So now let's hear from Manuel. And my question to Manuel would be, we heard from Gonzalo about the engagement of the financial sector, which is something we have seen, this year with the highlight of the summit organized by the US. And Pablo is talking about green recovery connected to NDC enhancement. So Manuel, you have mentioned a few times that there is this new climate economic system or an economic system that has climate as at its center that is starting to emerge. What does it look like and what could be the role of Latin America in this context?
Thank you, Fernanda, and thank you very much to my good friend, to Gonzalo, to Pablo, to John Henry, and to you, Fernanda, for organizing and inviting me to be part of this. And again, our apologies to the audience for making this in English, but you explained why, and also what we want it is to recognize that this is an event for Latin America and the Caribbean, no? So it is for both English and Spanish speakers. But let me start by talking this idea of a climate economy, a functioning climate economy that for me is key. Some days ago in an event, a good friend from the US administration told me that probably we are in a time in which corporations are working based in this balance in between climate risk analysis and adjustment. And that could be seen as the seed of a new functioning climate economy. So despite on exactly where we are in the beginning, in the middle, no, my point is that what it is currently happening with the world and with the decision that we have taken as a planet, it is defining a new economic system that it is conditioned by climate consideration that includes, as Gonzalo mentioned, a clear vision by the end of the century that it is to avoid, to don't raise the temperature in more than 1.5, the mid of the century that it is to be net zero by the mid of the century and resilience to climate change, by 2030, in which we are expecting to raise ambition in at least 50% more, and that is why the importance of the NDCs and the current action. And all the decisions that the world is taking, as for example, the EU by defining 55%, US 52%, Colombia 51 or 52, I don't remember exactly the number, UK 58%, Chile 45% of raising ambition, it is changing the way in which the economy is used to work. And that is a key element to frame this event. Because we are here in a Latin American Climate Week, and the point, Latin America and the Caribbean Climate Week. So the point it is to identify, based on this new climate economy, where we are. That for me, it is a key element. So let me give some ideas to try to describe, in my humble point of view, where we are. Mm-hmm. First, I think that we are fully distracted of that reality. Latin America, it is mostly distracted of that reality. We are not necessarily following what it is the current global trend. So we're not following the element of that climate economy. And why we are distracted? Probably because we have some other priorities. And I am not going to judge if those priorities are more important or less important than the climate one, or that are related to the climate economy. But the point it is that we are distracted. We are not recognizing all those time by the end of the century, half of the century, by 2030. And what does it mean for us? Let me say something that it is well reflected in a book released by LAC, CEPAL in Spanish, no? Saying that if we are not able to take climate considerations, our structural loss of GDP it will be at least 25% by year 2050. And we know that we are losing GDP because of pandemic, but that is a temporary situation. The point it is that without climate conservation, the loss, it could be 25%, a structural loss of the GDP. That is huge amount of money. That means more people under the poverty of line. So we are distracted. Secondly, we are fragmented. That is a reality. And in some way, Fernanda, your beautiful, well-developed, multicolor map of Latin America showing in green, red, yellow, and gray for those countries that haven't yet put a new NDC on the table, is showing how fragmented we are as Latin America and the Caribbean, no? So countries that still are denying the importance of taking climate consideration, despite of its link with the economy. Friends of Latin America, let me say something. Now it is not about an agreement, for sure. We must fulfill with the agreement and achieve its objective. But now we are beyond an agreement. It is about the economy. It is about our economy. It is about our own development. And that is something that we must understand. If not, we are going to be behind the others in a world that it is all the time competing with new technologies, with more innovation, with new rules. By don't follow the climate consideration could put us as a region behind the others. So that's something that we should take into consideration. And let me make a clarification, Fernanda. I am not just talking about governments. I am talking about the different actors of the region, because this includes the business sector. Our business sector, it is strongly behind what it is happening globally in relation to climate action. Okay, so we are distracted, we are fragmented, and that is why we are not following a vision. And as Gonzalo mentioned, we are not defining incentives for change. I don't have in front of me the map of how many countries have adopted a carbon pricing policies, but are not too much. Are 4 or 5 in Latin America, or how many Latin American countries have joined the coalition of Ministers of Finance for Climate that was created by Chile and Finland, that it currently it has 60 members, but not too many from Latin America. So the point it is that we are not creating the incentive, we are not taking advantage of the room that it has been created to have us there, to at least to discuss, to be more aware, to be more conscious of what it is happening, and hopefully to take action. So we don't need to switch that. We don't need to convince our authorities and our main actors that we must be part of this new reality of the world. And probably I don't want to take too much more time. I think that Latin America, it is stuck in a traditional source of energy. No, the point it is that we know how rich we are as a region. No, when we think about fossil fuels, even coal. Pablo is from Colombia, and we know that Colombia is one of the main exporters of coal. Friend, despite of that richness, those fossil fuels are going to be out of the economy one by one. The first one is going to be coal, then the most heavy fossil fuels as diesel. And that is why many countries are taking decisions not only about its exploration and exploitation, but also as a source of energy for example, transport. Many countries are taking decisions about electric vehicles. And in our case, Peru, I am Peruvian, no? We are strongly behind those kind of policies. What it would be the consequence of don't consider those policies, that we could be the landfill that could receive the waste of all technology for the most developed countries. So there are many consequences of being so distracted in relation to what it is happening in the world. So we are stuck in tradition based in this geopolitical discussion of energy security. No, I do need to continue exploiting oil because my neighbor, no. And we are not cooperating each to other, no? And that is creating all this reality in which Latin America it is stuck. No, and all of that, it is defining that we are not innovative, for sure. We are not innovative because we are not looking the future. We are stuck in our current times and not thinking where we want to be in 2050 and how to move to there. So today's presentation by you, Fernanda, it has been about NDC, but let's move it now to LTS, long-term strategies. No, how many countries of Latin America have already defined the net zero objective by 2050 and how to move to that time? Not many. I don't have the number in my mind, but I am sure that few, no, of the Latin American and Caribbean countries. So let me finish this question by saying to Latin America friends, the idea of this kind of weeks, it is to recognize, to be aware, and based on, to understand, and based on that understanding, to move our action. And I don't know who exactly is in the audience, but if you are an individual, if you are part of an NGO, if you are from the business sector, move you and move the other. So tell to your country that we cannot stay in where we are now. We have to move soon. If not, the consequences for our countries and for our own development are going to be really, really big.
Okay, so thanks a lot, Manuel, for, bringing this big picture perspective and also for inspiring us and telling us that we need to move and how to move. I think that the beauty of, organizing a WWF event is that we can have those diverse views from the non-state actor perspective, from Pablo, who's working with NDCs, and from you, Manuel, on the multilateral scenario. But we also think it's very, very important and fantastic that we can have John Henry to tell us about the experience on the ground. So on the Colombia NDC now, what are some successes and some challenges that you can share with us, John Henry, from the work that you did to get to an NDC we want? Over to you.
Thank you, Fernanda. Thank you very much for inviting us to participate in this panel. A warm greeting to all the attendees as well as to the other panelists. It is a privilege to share this dialogue with climate champions such as the ones that are in this panel. Of course, in the case of Colombia, it is pretty similar to other countries. We developed a process of updating our NDC in a very peculiar moment that was the pandemics. So the first of the challenges that came to my mind with your question was how about participation during this process, since of course with this new reality everything changes, and we had the lack of counting with the WWF for this purpose. So the first thing that I would talk about in terms of how we did our NDC was that we considered that this NDC was a participatory NDC. We held several different spaces where we shared the process and where we received some feedback. We had specific workshops with companies and associations of entrepreneurs from different sectors such as industry, agriculture, transportation, among others. We carried out several communication spaces in which we presented the process of updating our NDC, and we were able to answer some questions. We had a highly publicized public consultation where all Colombians and even people from outside of Colombia had the opportunity to share what were their impressions. We shared a preliminary document in October of past year that had some of the elements that were finally going to be taken to the final version of our NDC, and that preliminary version we put it in a consultation process where we received a lot of feedback, and that was very, very useful for us. And we also had some specific dialogues with representatives from ethnic communities, farmers, Afro-Colombians, women, and young organizations. So from all of that, we really had as I said, a preliminary version in October. And if you compare the version that we finally submitted to the UNFCCC, you will find that there are several differences in terms that we really had many opportunities to improve our NDC, for example, in terms of what we call our cross-cutting elements, such as gender, such as fair transition to implement our NDCs actions, and so on. And also we had a very strong signal from the general public that ambition was something that was very important for them, that we had to hear what science tell us. Fortunately, in parallel to the process that we were advancing in terms of participation, we were also advancing in a very robust process in terms of developing a portfolio, and this is something that we think it's something that is very peculiar to the Colombia's NDC. That is, we developed a complete portfolio in terms of mitigation measures as well as adaptation measures. This portfolio comprises some measures that are developed by different sectors of the economy. We did our best to include the whole of the economy of Colombia. So we were working from the Ministry of Environment, whose role was as to coordinate the process, but in reality, each one of the measures, we have about 196 measures in our NDC, was built along with the entities that are directly responsible for their implementation. We know that many of the measures are not going to be implemented in any way by only one entity, but we made sure that there was at least one entity that is going to take the leadership, and it's going to make sure to gather the other entities and to make all things happen to be able to precisely go ahead with this with implementation of the NDC. So each one of the 196 measures, as I said, is led by one specific entity. And in terms of, for example, mitigation, we did a very thorough process in terms of building our reference scenario. We did the same exercise in 2015. Nevertheless, we updated it because we had better information. We included new sources of carbon sinks and carbon emissions. And as a result, we had a new reference scenario. Our typology of target in terms of mitigation is a reduction compared by 2030 compared with a business as usual scenario. So the value changed a little bit, it increased a little bit because we included new sources that we were not foreseen in the 2015 scenario. And from that, what we did was building our mitigation scenario. For that, what we did was modeling the major measures in terms of mitigation that contributed the most and also that had the best information available, that had to go through a filter in order to make sure that the information was reliable. And from that, what we did was building our mitigation scenario. We had a signal from one side, the technical side, that was, okay, we have these measures, and these measures are measures that already count with the political and the technical possibility to be feasible. This is not some promises in the air. Those are measures that in many cases are precisely grounded by some specific law that is already enacted or in process of being enacted. So many of the measures already have this kind of support. What we did was building this scenario. We had the final result, and we had some kind of different ranges of action. And we said, okay, we have this range that is kind of a conservative one. This is like what we already have in the pocket, like the low apples in the tree that are easy to catch. We have we had an intermediate scenario that was like, okay, we have this on the pocket, but at the same time, with the NDC process, we are advancing with our long-term strategy. And the long-term strategy by that time was already giving us some signals. For example, what was the level of emissions that we need to have by 2030 in order to comply with our carbon neutrality commitment by 2050? So if we committed to a very conservative process goal by 2030, it was the same as admitting with 30 years in advance that we were not going to commit to that we were not going to fulfill our commitments to the long term. So of course, there was this input that was all the measures and the mitigation scenario, but also the very important sign that the 2050 strategy was giving us. So with that in mind, and also taking into account that science is very clear, and I don't have to overstate this, we all have this very clear in terms of the urgency of the action. At the end, we decided to finally have a 51% reduction that in comparison, even though we are talking about different, slightly different reference scenarios, just as a reference, in 2015, we committed to a 20% reduction unconditional. Now we are saying 51% unconditional, but of course we are going to do everything we can to increase the international cooperation, because of course our NDC is ambitious. And in terms of adaptation, we also made a very important progress. We compiled, or we had the participation of 6 prioritized economic sectors: transport, energy, agriculture, livelihoods, health, commerce, tourism, and industry. Those are more than 6, sorry. We had meetings with them, and also that was a process of building with them what were they able and what was necessary. And from that, we developed a portfolio of 30 measures in adaptation. Our NDC is comprised by 3 documents: the main document and 2 documents more, one for the portfolio of mitigation measures and the other one for the portfolio of adaptation goals. So if you take a look at our adaptation goals portfolio, you are going to see that each one of those measures has the specific activities, what are the milestones, what are the indicators, which are the possible sources of financing, which entities are responsible. So we try to be very responsible with that. And also what we did was not only including economic sectors. So for instance, in terms of mitigation measures, we included specific commitments from territories. We deemed that that was convenient for many reasons. Just to give some visibilization to the work and the progress in different regions, and also in terms of trying to also perhaps have a little bit of pressure to the territory, so you are already in an international commitment. So and also of course to be able to get some attention from the international support in terms of the local measures. Apart from that, we included specific commitments from companies. We have 6 major companies of Colombia that included 7 companies that included specific measures in terms of mitigation, and we are in the process of adding more of them. The NDC is a changing document, not in terms of our commitments, of course, but in terms of that we are going to include more stakeholders, more actions, and that just to close, where we developed our NDC in 3 components. So mitigation and adaptation I already talked about, and there was a component of means of implementation that include those kind of actions that are more transversal to each one of the to all the NDCs. Sorry, where we included specific commitments in terms of, for example, science that we developed along with the Ministry of Science. We include specific commitments in terms of fair transition that we develop with the relevant ministry, the Ministry of Work. And also in terms of financing, we had some approaches in terms of, for example, costing of adaptation measures. We're working right now on the costing of mitigation measures, and this is an ongoing process, of course, that it began with the official delivery of the NDC by the end of December, and right now we are working precisely in defining this specific critical work routes that we have to develop right now in order to make our NDC be possible by 2030. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. So we are running out of time of our speakers, and it's always a reality in those events because it's so rich and we have so many things to say. Thank you very much for sharing your experience with us. And I think that you finished on means of implementation, and that's a nice bridge to the next question that I have for Pablo. Most NDCs in LAC, of course, they have unconditional, but they also have conditional components. So how to unlock finance at scale to finance for NDCs in the LAC region, Pablo? I know that's the $1 million question, or maybe even much more, but I'm sure you have some insights to share.
Yeah, and of course, what 2 minutes? So that's that makes it easy. But yeah, the first thing I want to say before going into unlocking finance is that one of the things that we have seen in the countries that have submitted NDCs that have been supported by us is that the unconditional portion is becoming smaller or even disappearing in some of the cases. So we're seeing in some countries moving into fully unconditional and less conditional commitments. So that's very important. It doesn't mean that they don't need to mobilize support, like John Henry just said. So it's very important. But when we're talking to our members, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean, what we're hearing from them right now is we have demonstrated our commitment and ambition through updated NDCs. It is time for implementation. We need to demonstrate, as Manuel is saying, that we're moving forward, aligning our NDCs with our development pathways to demonstrate that we can reach net zero, but also the benefits, the social and economic benefits of strong climate action. But support is needed to mobilize climate finance, particularly by involving the private sector in anticipation of course, the current situation with growing financial burden and debt by countries. So the top priorities from the region based on requests that we have received are first, unlocking finance at scale, but by mobilizing resources and financing for specific projects and programs that have been developed as part of the NDC, specifically by designing climate finance strategies, by developing investment strategies and financial roadmaps, by integrating climate finance into government processes, I don't know, such as public procurement processes, by giving specific support for engagement in the private sector. So let me share a couple of examples. Now, in Ecuador, the Ministry of Environment and Water and the Ministry of Economy and Finance are co-leading the process of building the country's national climate finance strategy, which is a planning instrument that will define the vision, the priorities, and the strategic lines on the sources and uses of climate finance, public, private, national, international. Ecuador is also an example in terms of intersectoral coordination with the Mesa de Finanzas Sostenibles. And I know that in Colombia, through CISCLIMA, we have a very good example of that also. But I didn't want to talk too much about Colombia. Co-led by the Environment and Finance Ministries, which work to promote the responsibility of the financial sector in supporting sustainable economic transition. But given the region's emerging economy status, the difficulty to tap into aid and to be successful through GCF, for example, it is not surprising that many countries are looking to the private sector to mobilize finance for their NDCs. And they're doing this by creating enabling environments, as Manuel pointed out very well, and Gonzalo. The conditions need to be there, and by designing incentives for accessing private finance. Dominican Republic, for example, is developing public-private partnerships for the achievement of the NDCs, and they're promoting exchanges with the private sector on policy commitments, regulations, data, and effective practices, among others, because it's fundamental to have a conversation, a productive conversation between the private sector and the government in terms, what do you need from us, and what am I asking from you to be able to achieve these goals? No, the carrot and the stick with the taxes, but also the incentives is fundamental, and all that is there. So governments can bring investors to the table by first mitigating uncertainty, second by mitigating the perceived risk. And this can be done through turning climate priorities into specific project pipelines and investment plans. So it gives clarity in terms of what are those investments, increasing coordination across national financial bodies by clarifying what the government can do for the private sector in terms of regulatory and policy elements for an enabling environment. And finally, by identifying mechanisms like national funds or blended finance vehicles that can provide additional capital to help the private sector get more engaged and involved in the process. And I'll stop there to move forward. Thanks.
Yeah, we are approaching the hour, and I know that some people will have to leave, will start to leave. So I would like to hear from Manuel to close our conversation here that could go on for hours. how we connect this to COP26. So Manuel, what do you think we need at COP26, and not only at COP26, because we know this is a process, but COP26 and beyond, to foster, you know, more ambition and also implementation in the Latin America region?
Thank you, Fernanda, and thank you, because this is a question that I can answer in 15 seconds. Nothing. We don't need nothing else. We don't need awareness, understanding. We don't need to connect with that economy. Latin America needs to understand that we shouldn't continue asking for more. We do need to move our own action. That's the point. I read, I think, I don't remember the name, the Andorra statement, because of the meeting of the Cumbre Iberoamericana in Andorra. And I read it, and it was amazing. It was asking for more, and nothing about action. No, we don't need to understand that we are in a global planet, in a globalized planet. And if we postpone our actions, that will have consequences, negative consequences for sure. No, so it is not, no, we are expecting to have in COP26 this additional. No, we don't need that. For sure, we are expecting good things on COP26 for the global process that could continue encouraging countries to do more things. But to start, we don't need to wait even until November. We don't need to start today in Latin America with clear actions to align our actions with this new economy that it is emerging in the world. That is for me really, really key.
Okay, and if we have 1 minute more, I would ask Henry, what's next? What are the next steps for Colombia? If you could be really brief so we can close in implementing this NDC we want.
Yes, well, as I said at the end of my intervention, from the very minute we sent the official NDC, we started working in what we call our NDC implementation plan. The NDC implementation plan is a document where we are going to identify all the critical routes. That not to say that it is going to in any way delay the action, because there are several measures of the NDC that are already being implemented. But once we have the complete NDC, what we are doing right now is identifying what are the critical routes in terms of, for example, financing. We know that there's work to do in terms of financing. So in terms of identifying the main sources, costing our mitigation measures, for example, that's something very important for us. Costing our adaptation measures, we are having progress in both of them, and we know that this is necessary for many other things. This is like a trigger for many other things. So we are trying to work on that. We are focusing on having more stakeholders to this. We recently launched what is called Colombia Carbono Neutral, which is a new strategy that is intended to have more companies, more territories, and more people on board on the NDC by having specific actions, specific commitments. So we're trying to reinforce our NDC, costing of our mitigation measures, and also working in terms of territories, having more contact with them. We already have a very good institutional framework that allows us to work on that. And well, we are working against the clock right now, because we understand that this is a very ambitious commitment that requires, of course, urgent action, and we are right now working on that in very general terms.
Well, thank you very much for your fantastic interventions. Much to think about. I hope that this inspired you and provoked your thoughts as much as mine. Thank you all for your presence, for being here today. A special thanks to our speakers for having the time to be here with us, sharing those fantastic insights and experiences. This has been great, and I hope the LAC Climate Week is also as inspiring and thought-provoking as this event was. Thank you very much. Thanks to all, and apologies to the audience that we don't have much time for questions, but we hope to be organizing more events like this. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Fernanda. Chao, Pablo. Chao,
Thank you. Gracias.
Bye-bye.
Chao.
Chao a todos, que estén muy bien.
Gracias.
Gracias.